Jim Joyce. Did I do it
I
right,
like
or I'm
it.
losing it? I keep
You're
testing
nailing
myself.
it.
I keep variating, man.
It's an evolution. There's no mistakes. It's only happy accidents. It's only happy.
No, listen, absolutely, and I'm happy to say I'm not wearing a shirt. Marty was making fun of me today, I guess, in one of our Your Coach posts. Like, I'm wearing a jacket and a shirt, and he's like, "What's happening? Like, what? What's
Right.
happening to you?"
It's
So
off
I don't
brand,
know.
man. It's off
Yeah,
brand. It's off brand.
yeah,
Yeah. No, I like
yeah.
it. We
It's a
got the
little
t-shirt,
brand.
a little casual.
Exactly.
So how's
How you doing
how's the week?
otherwise?
Summer? Yeah, good,
Um,
good. I'm up for a big traveling sprint now. I'm actually I'll see Martin Kelly. Like we're doing I'm doing Boston to New York, back to Boston to Orlando to Chicago, all in the next like 3 or 4 weeks. So I'll be on the road.
wow.
Yourself?
Yeah, about the same. So I think we're gonna overlap in the East Coast, and I'm still seeing if I can make your Big Vision event. No
Awesome.
promises, but I'll keep you posted. Yeah, and then
Awesome.
actually we come back and then off to Chicago, and then Maryland, and then back, and then Milan for Frontiers in October.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'll pause here. That's like months of
That's enough
stuff. That's enough for
for
now.
everyone.
So,
Yeah, for
exactly.
everyone. Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then I guess we're gonna hop over. Oh, and London. So speaking of for my younger one who is heading out to UCL for school. So and
It's
speaking of
amazing.
London, that's what made me think about London. That we're gonna sneak that in. We're gonna let Ash in. Ash
Awesome.
Patel. We've been trying to coordinate, and even though we're meticulously unproduced, actually, we finally made it. Welcome,
Hey,
Ash.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Ash. Good to see you, my friend.
Good to see you again. How you doing?
Good.
I know many times Jim is like, I've met them or know them, and then like the other 30-40%, I don't know, we haven't taken the number, but it's great
Yeah.
that we the three of us know each other pretty well.
Right.
So
The ecosystem kind of,
Yeah.
recycles.
It's been a while, buddy. How have you been?
Good. No, I have to say, to start off with Ash, Ash obviously from a prior company was in as an investor, really excited for today. Just found you to be incredibly precise and elegant and in the conversations about looking at it from that perspective. So I enjoyed our meetings.
I hope your perception doesn't change after this meeting. So
Set the
really excited
standard.
to be here, guys. Yeah, really great to see you all. Thank you
by
so
the
much.
way, elegant is going into the show notes, so just so you know. So.
Can I send a copy to my wife? I don't think she'll believe anyone's ever said that.
Right. This is all for your wife.
Well, Jim and I know you, but for our millions of listeners and viewers, take us through your life, Ash. Start wherever
Cool.
you want to
So,
start.
Yeah, well,
we got time.
Yeah. So my name is Ashish Patel. I'm an investment banker working at a firm called Numis, which is an international investment bank based in London. We have offices in New York and Dublin as well. I'm a managing director that leads part of our private markets group, which means we advise and invest in growth stage technology companies. Most of my clients are a mixture of tech, deep tech, healthcare, life sciences. I have a particular fondness and bias towards healthcare in general. By way of my kind of professional background. So starting my career as a doctor, I was practicing in London for a number of years, having graduated from Oxford Medical School, specialized in anesthesia and intensive care medicine, and then left in 2014, so quite a way back now, to join the founding team of Babylon Health as one of the first few employees, where I built product and technology for a number of years. So I kind of led product R&D through the first few iterations of the company, so saw through the fundraisings, and through that got exposed to health tech kind of on the vertical part of the learning curve in terms of actually trying to build a business and build products that customers use. Did that for a few years and then eventually moved into venture investing, wound up working for Optum Ventures, which is the independent investment arm of United Health Group. Jim, that's where you and I met, and Eugene as well, I think. And there I was part of a team that covered kind of rest of world, non-US investments. So investing across Europe, Middle East, going into Australasia and Asia as well. So kind of a broad sweep of interest there. And again, focus pretty much exclusively on healthcare technology. And then I joined Numis, where I am now, just over a year ago, primarily because a great opportunity, but also a recognition of a gap in the market on the European side of the house. So, and you guys are kind of operators in this space, so love to get your take on whether you think this is real or not. But my perception was, when I was an investor, is that there's actually it's never easy to raise capital as an entrepreneur. I kind of get annoyed when people say, "Oh, there's a ton of money out there." It's like, well,
bullshit.
yeah, but yeah, bullshit. Yeah, it's never easy to get someone to give you money, right? But at the same time, there is capital available in the early parts of the ecosystem, and there's lots of great incentive schemes and good backers in that part of the system.
Right.
But there's lots of money available also if you are a kind of a private equity style business where you want to go public, and there are big investors available to support that. But where Europe had a gap, and still has a gap, we believe structurally, was in growth rounds. So that is when you've made your product, it's kind of with customers, you're generating revenue, and you need that, call it 50, 75, $100 million to really accelerate the business, really put fuel on the fire. And there just isn't a ton of that available in Europe from European funds. There are some fantastic players operating in that space, but generally speaking, if you look at the data, it bears out greater than 60% of that kind of capital comes from the US into European businesses, which is incredibly painful if you're a European founder and you're trying to raise capital from far-flung lands, and you don't get to go there very easily to visit people during COVID, for example. But also if you're an investor and you've got these great portfolio companies and you can't get them in front of people. So at Numis, what we do is help connect those two parts of the market system. And our clients are cut across technology generally, which is very interesting. And there's a lot, I think, in healthcare we can learn from that. But also, we look at how capital markets operate globally, and we help bring Asian money, Middle Eastern money, American money, as well as European money to some of these companies. And we put a little bit of our own in alongside as well.
Awesome. I was going to say, I love the raising capital question, Eugene. My father had an expression that said, Jim, if people ever give you money, they generally want it back. That was the expression they would give. It's maybe a bit more, So go and pitch that way.
Yeah,
I like it. That's also a great quote. I was going to tell like a little bit story that I back in the days.
What was yours?
Tell startups. It's you can be on stage. There's 3,000 listening. Everybody's clapping. Maybe then you kind of get off the stage, and there might be, I don't know, a line of X number of dozen of people, and they're like, okay, clapping, right? And then you ask for feedback, and out of those few dozen, maybe only a dozen stays for feedback, right? And then from the feedback, you ask to be maybe an advisor, and then you got like maybe one or two standing still around, and then you ask for money, and it's like, what? No one here.
The group, it thinned out really quickly there.
Yeah.
So anyway, so critical question. Why medical school? You had the grades, your parents made you do it. What's the reason?
So my parents weren't massively keen on it. I suspect primarily because they thought I wouldn't make the grades. And so, so there was an element of risk there, which didn't pan out, which actually worked out pretty well in the end. But genuinely, it was, in all honesty, it was 2004, and if you're an Indian kid in North London who's good at science, you went to medical school. I wish I had a better answer than that, but that's genuinely the way the world worked.
Right, it's culturally,
it was cultural and
acceptable.
No one goes to the school careers fair and says, I want to be a doctor, and someone says, no, don't do that, go do something else instead. So I kind of got swept along with it. Actually, having gone into the field, I really loved it, and it was so I'm one of the few lucky people who I guess has found stuff somewhat unintentionally and found that I love it as I go along. So I don't have no regrets about going to medical school. Equally, I have no regrets about going into finance. Like I've just found stuff to do through my career, which I just enjoy doing.
Awesome.
I do remember that discussion in London. I forget where we were sitting, but just grabbing a coffee or whatever. And I remember you were telling me kind of the early days of Babylon. What actually, I think this was a second large venture, right, for Ali. I'm sure there were more. I don't know the full history, but coming into something built from scratch, like what made you say yes, right? And again, yes, medical background, but you kind of mentioned you were driving product, right, and R&D. So just kind of that flip.
I guess like even before all of this this bit of my career, like I've always believed that great companies can change the world for people. So I just look at my everyday life, like Google. I was using Google Maps today to try and find a coffee shop. Like, can you imagine doing that 20 years ago? You'd have to
Right.
stop someone and ask them, like, where's a coffee shop? And now it's
Right.
all just seamless. That's a small thing, but it changes the way your life works. And there's much bigger impacts of technology we can all think of as well. So, like, my starting position was great companies can build stuff that's really useful to people. There wasn't a ton of that happening in healthcare like 15 years ago. They when I was coming through the system, like certainly not in Europe. I was based out of London,
Yeah.
but you didn't really see a huge amount of in the startup ecosystem, and you didn't see those companies operating at scale in a way that like a civilian like I was at the time, could just use in everyday life. It's kind of different when you operate in the ecosystem and you're checking TechCrunch and you're looking at the news feeds and you kind of know what's going on with these companies. Go ask your grandma, like, what have you seen recently? That's a perception of what the real world sees, not the world which we live in, right? And in that world, none of this stuff was happening. So meeting an entrepreneur that was saying, look at all the stuff that's happening in food delivery or airline bookings or any other aspect of your life, look how that's changed. And you're still doing the same job as the guy who did your job 20 years ago. That's going to change and we're going to change it. I think that was, for me, that was really exciting. And I was very lucky to be a part of that journey in that part of my career.
And when you think about these, like, we've been thinking a lot about this, or Eugene and I have been talking about these, I'll call them like kind of tastemaker companies. I really feel like Babylon was one of those, where, they were just so far out there. We had, the folks from Cahill on, we had Paratherapeutics on in the last month and a half right now. When you think about these organizations, what's your take on reflecting on, these organizations that really just kind of forced their way through, were able to kind of corral major capital to a movement? How are you feeling about them right now?
So I think, so the first thing to say is I think that the entrepreneurs that build those kinds of businesses are some of the most fearless people I know. Because it's really easy to see Uber moving cars around and say, hey, I can do that too, right? Like there's a different, it's not saying it's easy to build a business, but there's a different fear index involved in like, hey, I'm going to quit my job to go do this, versus where you've genuinely never seen anyone try and do it and you're trying to create something from scratch. So I think these companies tend to be founded by people who are just forces of nature, and that is what helps to corral the capital and bring it to the table, because you need investors to believe the story. There's often very little by way of data in terms of like P&L or financial proof points. You may not even have technical proof points early on because what you're building is so new that you can't even do a clinical trial to show that it works because you're still in the process of building it. So you need people to believe the story. And so these people are forces of nature. They are some of the best kind of storytellers in the world. I can't remember if it was kind of the whereas Socrates or Aristotle, but like, storytellers are the ones who rule society, right? And so like these are the best storytellers. And so I find them fascinating people to be around. I think as companies grow, the best ones are the ones who grow with it. And so you see that adaptation, right? When like because you've known these folks for 10 years in some cases, and you now watch their investor presentations in public markets. And Jim, you're CEO of a public market company as well, right? You've been through that journey yourself. But there's a difference between how you present in a closed room full of your people under NDA versus how you present on a web stream where the market's easy for eternity. And the great ones
you
are
got
the
like
ones
you got attorneys in one arm, a CFO in the other arm.
yeah. They're all holding you down, saying, "No, don't say it." But it's the truly great ones are the ones who can make that transformation. I don't think that's easy, because almost the type of personality and phenotype you need at the start of the journey is almost the opposite of what you need at that point in the journey. Although it's worthwhile noting, like, and again, it's interesting working now on later stage companies where some of our clients IPO or de-SPAC in some cases. It really is just another capital event. And it's funny how when you're in the early stage of the system, you think about the IPO as the exit, but actually for the CEOs, like, that's not an exit. It's just another source of money, because now there's future growth you're going to build on, and the ones who get that are really powerful.
And just out of curiosity, right? What was kind of one of the bigger lessons that you took from Babylon? Again, this sounds, it was like your kind of, and then I want to switch to what made you move into venture capital right after being on that other side of the entrepreneur.
Yeah, I mean, The biggest lesson is that when you're working in a frontier market, like sometimes in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man truly can be king. And because you're dealing with stuff that like genuinely you think there's loads of smart people in the world, and there are, but there are some things that some smart people just haven't stopped to think about yet. And so I don't have to be as smart as them, provided I can be first. And so that velocity in getting stuff done and just moving fast, and just not moving fast and breaking things, because I do think in healthcare, regulated industry, people's lives at stake, you've got to do it the right way.
Yep.
Right.
But not being scared and thinking, oh, I'm surely somebody's already thought of it. Like sometimes there is some stuff that people just haven't thought of. And you don't have to be Albert Einstein to think of it and say, well, if I just get it done by tomorrow morning, we'll have done it. And just those steps will add up really quickly.
Yeah, I think this bias to action, right? Like from that,
absolutely,
that whereas everyone said, I'm worried or someone else is going to have it, or this, like, you almost feel like the tech system is so developed, like the underlying SaaS and tech and consumer tech models are so developed that people are playing at these niches, where they really feel like I have to have something so unique or so transformative. Whereas healthcare, there's just so much basics that need to be done still. Isn't everybody sit here today?
Yeah. I mean, the stuff that you guys are working on very interesting companies, but there are less interesting companies from a technological perspective, which are still going to have a big impact, right? Like, I'm not trying to disparage innovation. I think it's super important. But sometimes just recognizing, like, in a pen and paper world, genuinely filling out a PDF on an iPad is moving things along.
Yeah. Well, look, one of those, since you mentioned a bunch of publicly traded companies that we had on here, but like Freesia was another one. I still remember kind of the early days in New York, right? I mean, on one side, they did nothing more than put a little pad in every office, right? And now they're public. I haven't been tracking them. But Jim, I know you and I kind of discussed, like, we should put like a digital health index together or something. Like, should we add Freesia into
exactly.
it? No.
Exactly. Well, no, here's our idea, and you can tell us, Ash, if this is a good idea or not. Is we're going to do one of those, kind of fake, because I can't invest. I got to be careful about what I invest in. But we're going to take a, kind of a fictional, like, Jim and Eugene token, right? We're going to take $1 million. We're going to take $1 million.
Are we doing tokens now? Okay, I like it.
I don't know.
If you're doing tokens, I'm in. Let's go for it.
Right. No, we're going to take $1 million, through one of those, like, and create an index called the Shada Digital Health Index. So it's the publicly traded companies that have come through the Shada Digital Health, or ones that Eugene knows really well. And so I think I've got about 8 companies, Eugene. Actually, I built the index yesterday.
Did you already?
And I put $1 million into it, but then I'm not going to say one of the companies already knocked it out of the box a little bit. I won't say which one. Not mine for the record. So, but because it's kind of, is a little bit of lead in that, if you think about what's happening in this market space, if I look at those companies, and I don't know if you agree, Ash, is if I look at those companies, those 8 companies, they kind of feel like venture investments still. So meaning, like, at the values they're at, the values aren't, it's not what it was like a few years ago, right? In terms of the valuations, the values are at, 2 or 3 of those guys are going to be billion, multiple billions, from where they're at. 3 or 4 of them are going to give you like a nice return, and probably 2 or 3 are going to struggle to get across the finish line. That's be my prediction on it. But I don't know. Would you agree?
I mean, look, I think generally speaking, if you look at small cap indexes, that's what happens, right? So like that's not like
the venture.
It follows a very similar pattern, perhaps a slightly higher break even, kind of modest success rate than venture does. I mean, in venture, there's seed Series A, there's a lot of failure, right? And that's the power law is even more exaggerated. But I think you're spot on. I think the index. I mean, so we build and track that index. We've got analysts who are tracking that in our bank. It's an area which we've built out.
Oh, so you have a digital health index?
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's an area in which of like serious focus for us. So and actually we look at it differently to like general healthcare companies, because like what some of our criteria in terms of like how do you think about this business is actually thinking about how would this company, when it starts to scale up, how does the economics shift within that business? Like, if your gross margins are north of 50-60%, that's a fundamentally different proposition to a bricks and mortar hospital operation where you just don't see that.
Interesting.
And so and one of the challenges I think some digital health companies have is and again, never really appreciated this till I got into the investment banking side of it, is who buys the stock when you do decide to go public? Like, because you're like, are you going to get bought by a healthcare index? Because most healthcare indices are quite defensive.
Right.
Like, you're in there with a bunch of companies who's don't really have massive high growth, but equally never have bad years either.
Right.
And then you've got these companies which are really high growth, but the trade-off is high growth is high volatility.
Right.
So I do wonder whether the market will bifurcate a bit, and you'll get, in the same way as you could argue that like I don't know, like Amazon or Warby Parker are a consumer, and so it should be in the same bucket as Pepsi Cola, but we know that they're not the same as Pepsi Cola, right? So we put them in a different bucket when we're indexing them. So maybe at some point, some smart, well-funded hedge fund guys will set up a different index and say, actually, this is a different allocation which we're going to have if you want exposure to the high growth healthcare companies.
Right.
I mean, for me, I'm curious, Jim added 8, right? You don't have to disclose, but I'm sure there's much more. Like, I think we're still in this like definitional space. Like, to use an example, like is Teladoc and Amwell, yeah, it's digital as telemed, but like, I don't know if I would bundle them. Like, I wouldn't add that to your index, Jim. Like but maybe, I don't know. Like,
yeah, I feel like, I mean, I kind of threw them right in, you know what I mean? Like just to make it up, because I was thinking about the, the Livongo acquisition and felt like that was the greatest, initially at the time. I know there's been, there's been some challenges there, but like that was such a transformative, kind of look at the future company. And then Amwell, didn't they buy? Amwell bought who? SilverCloud, right?
SilverCloud and
our other buddies,
our buddy Murray, right?
Murray.
Why am I forgetting?
Conversa.
That's it.
Conversa. Yeah. So but I mean, you're right. Like the definitional thing. When does they move back in? But maybe Ash, your kind of qualification of like, organizations that are leveraging technology that are operating at 60%, 50, 60% plus gross margins, I don't know. I'm assuming those companies, that's where they're at.
Oh, but I would argue someone. So go ahead, Ash, please.
No, go ahead, please. I
was going to say, because I think some of the maybe I'll give a little bit more and then Ash. I think kind of from a services digital health business, right? But if you're pure DTX, right? I mean, you probably are 90, 100 plus, gross margins. So that's also like different levels of it, right? And now, again, my hypothesis is that I just don't know how these companies that are just doing pure software-based interventions can really compete, right? From a perspective of other services surrounding it and et cetera.
Right.
But
what do you think, Ash?
I think so just unpacking that a little bit, like from a pure DTX perspective, like if you didn't know the difference between digital and physical, I don't get why you wouldn't think of that as biotech, because it's taking IP and you're using that to then deliver a biological impact eventually. As on some level, all of this comes down to biology, right? In the patients that you're treating. So like you are, the fact that it's not a drug or a molecule, but it's an intervention delivered via a screen. Like an alien from Mars might be like, so what? Why is that such an important distinction to make? So from a pure IP perspective, and that recognizes the fact that most biotech pharma companies that are listed have no intention of distributing their products. They're expecting to get acquired by acquisition engines that then have distribution, big pharma companies. And so I wonder whether the same kind of pattern of events will unfold in DTX land eventually as well, where it makes sense for a pharma company to say, actually, we're going to have a division which delivers purely digital solutions for a patient subset, and that's where we can monetize some additional IP there. I think the question of can those exist without a service model? I think they can, but I think it'll have an uneven spread in markets, because if you look at who gets medical problems, those are not generally populations that are the first. Like video conferencing as a solution had an adoption curve. If you say you're going to completely remove the physician altogether, there's another adoption curve. Like you've got to get through. So certain patient populations will do better than others in the early days, but then patients will get older, and this healthcare is a long-term game. Like if you're building an enduring business, you want to be there in 20, 30 years time. Well, today's 30, 40-year-olds are going to be tomorrow's kind of 60, 70-year-olds on that timescale.
Yeah. So what's your definition of like if you were to do digital health index, like what goes in, what goes out?
I think any company which is using um, computational infrastructure to move the cost curve of delivery of healthcare, for me, is it would go into that index. And the way in which you demonstrate that is through the unit economics on a per user
Delivery.
basis,
Yeah.
on a delivery basis. It has to be that. It can't be delivery through scale, because then that could be, you could include like private equity roll-ups of dental practices through that kind of logic, and that's clearly not what we're talking about. But it can, but each individual user must have a contribution margin to that business. I'm talking purely as a shareholder, how you'd want to think about that. And then, those businesses currently largely have quite a heavy service component, and you've got to recognize that. But the thesis has to be that over time they deleverage that service component, and more and more of it is done digitally. And that's eventually how they become kind of very profitable companies.
Did you hear, Eugene, that these companies are now the first companies are being listed in the drug database? Did you hear that?
Honestly, I've not seen like any news on, if you're talking about digital therapeutics, you're talking about?
Yeah, they're being listed in the drug database, which is, I guess, is a breakthrough. I just heard that. Interesting.
Well, I mean, look, I think that's been, we just had a discussion, I forget with who it went around, the specifically digital therapies. It's kind of like, well, is it a SAMD? Yeah, it's sort of treated as that, as a medical device. On the other side, it kind of keeps falling under, well, it's like pharma, right? Go through the whole clinical trial process and all of that and being treated that way. So I think, being listed, I mean, formularies, the PDTs, though, I haven't seen like prescription digital therapies being on the formulary, but I could be wrong. But, maybe the listeners watching us, but.
Do you think there's like a physician education piece in that? Because like,
oh yeah, right. I think, and I'll hold the other show that I cheat on Jim with. There will be in the next 2 weeks. So for those who watch this one, there will be somebody from the AMA, and that part of the discussion around exactly that, right? So.
It's a proper show, Ash. That's the one you want to get on.
When I get
that one is meticulously produced.
Give me my plus one.
Yeah. So one of the things, and again, right, you've been on, kind of as a trained doc, right, or clinical background, switch to the startup building, the frontiers of, let's call it diagnostics, right, self-diagnostics to a certain extent. That's kind of my summary of it. Switch to, Optum, venture investor, seen a lot, now at a bank, so kind of larger deals and growth deals. Can you, without getting into any kind of trouble within your bank, can you tell us a little bit what you've witnessed in the last, let's call it 6 months, and where your personal Ash view is on where it's heading? Personal only.
Actually, so to be honest with you, we put out a load of research in this sector because we just find no one else covers it, and we put out what we call our growth capital survey, where we survey 30 of the world's top investors across different subsectors, anonymize the results, and then put them out for anyone to read, just to get a view as to how the market's evolving. We do that every quarter.
Awesome.
So we've actually built up like proprietary data over the last year as to how, for some of the survey members are happy for us to name them, but like the likes of Sequoia or Silver Lake and so on, how they're really thinking about things at the senior managing partner level. I'd say right now, kind of the sentiment and the mood music in the market is candidly, it was quite quiet. I think anyone can look at the online PitchBook or Crunchbase data and say that not a lot of deals were getting done over Q1, Q2. The thing to remember is that just huge amounts of capital had been raised by investors in the form of dry powder. This is money where they've got commitments from their own investors, the limited partners, the LPs, who are typically,
and they're not giving it back
and stuff. And they make money when they make investments, and those investments make a return. Like there's not a lot of money to be made if you don't make investments. So that's sitting there on the sidelines. And what we're seeing is, and we did a piece of work a few days ago, actually just tracking of the deals that did get done between May of this year and to present day, within the range which we operate. What was the typical kind of uplift for the companies that did have up rounds in that time? Because you hear a lot about down rounds and flat rounds and layoffs, and it's interesting, it's 2.6x which
Wow.
surprised us because we kind of thought it might be a bit lower than that, right? Like
Right.
companies doubling valuations in these kinds of markets.
Right.
And what our own, then we cross-reference that against our own survey data for the last 2 quarters. And what we're seeing is that there's a real bifurcation in the market. So
Right.
the best companies can attract capital. It's probably a little bit tougher than it was a year ago, but they're still able to attract capital from tier 1 investors in the kind of quantums and valuations that makes everyone feel good about things.
Yep.
But it really is the best in the rest. And
Okay.
so like, what you're seeing is the market is splitting almost in 2 right now, where investors need to deploy, but they're being very selective about where they deploy.
Right.
And they would, from what we can see, almost rather pay a premium to get into the right company than
Right.
say, hey, it's the second or third best in the space, but it'll do. We'll stick our money. We can get into this deal and we'll make them the best over time. That kind
Right.
of mentality is kind of phasing out at the moment.
Got it. Interesting.
I love that. Best
You know
in
what
the
I think?
rest.
I love it. When you think, I was just thinking about, what I loved about, I mentioned them before already, but I mentioned with the Cahill concept was this idea of giving kids that had attention deficit disorder video games, like the fundamental premise of that as a curative, as a way of kind of meeting where they're at. Whereas if I look back, like say 10 years or even more than that, maybe 15 years, what was the company that was putting ingestible pills into schizophrenics?
Proteus.
Proteus.
Yeah.
Proteus. So if I look at that, like in terms of the evolution of space, that for me, that just captures it. It's like, one is trying to put, trying to get schizophrenics to ingest trackers, and the other is trying to put, a video game into kids with attention deficit disorder, both with curative and, smart technology. It feels like growth.
Even though
it does.
Even though Proteus is no longer, right? I mean, the assets got
Right.
bought out. In their defense, it wasn't, they were delivery mechanisms. So it's not like they chose to put, the pills
Yeah.
into
No, yeah.
But I get your point. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I wasn't trying to be tough on them.
No, I know.
So anywhere. I mean, it was amazing technology. It was an amazing thing, but a difficult challenge.
Yeah.
I think also like it's easy to underestimate, but there's just been a massive growth in the sophistication of these kinds of consumer-facing technologies in the last 10, 15 years.
Right.
And like what Proteus were playing with from an engineering perspective, like
Right.
it would have been difficult to find anyone who had done anything like that. Whereas like
100%.
Achilles products are amazing. I think that the results they deliver for patients are, that's really something, right?
Yep.
But you can get really sophisticated video games engineers. Like, and
Right.
there's a skill as well as an entrepreneur in recognizing where is the pool of talent going to be, because I'm not going to build everything. So
Right.
like, where's the pool of talent going to be available to be
Yep.
able to deliver a product which people are going to want to use?
Yeah.
And I think that's, hats off to them for figuring out kids like video games. There's a lot of very good video games designers, and we can make
Right.
video games that help them get better.
Yeah.
Well, we had
I think about
Eddie and
these
Carl
companies.
on. Sorry, Jim. I was just going to comment, right, because it's that mix, and for the one, just really worth rewatching that episode. I've actually re-listened to it on a walk because just Carl does not come from healthcare, right? And it was like that perfect match, and from kind of gaming tech. So just I wanted to comment.
Yeah, no, agree, 100%. Cool.
So, Jim, do we go to your famous question?
100%. So Ash, your index, your Numis index and investments have, more than 2.6x themselves. They've multiple, whatever happened in the last, they're just gone through the roof, and you're in such phenomenal circumstances that you are, the exalted investor in the industry, and you're walking through lovely London on a sunny day, and a young medic that's just joined had just joined a digital healthcare company that was transforming the NHS's healthcare system, has decided to go on his own and start his own company in absolutely exciting venture. And he says, Ash, I can't believe it's you. You're the one guy that I was looking for advice. What's the piece of advice you would give him?
So before we go any further, just got my compliance team will freak out if I don't say this, but technically we're advisors who do a bit of investments.
Okay,
so,
sorry.
I'll get in trouble if I don't correct that on the spot.
Sorry, that was me storytelling.
We'll do some great storytelling on that. But I think the advice is that I mean, look, I don't think that the pace of technological evolution is slowing down. I think if anything is getting faster, and more talented people are choosing to enter that field, and as a result, things get better and better. So the things that are going to be impactful for a young person today, when they're in their kind of 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever, those things probably don't exist yet. And
Right.
so it's not to be scared of doing stuff where it's not entirely obvious if anyone has tried to do it before. Chances are the best, most impactful things you can do, you will be the first. You will make a ton of mistakes. People will laugh at you from time to time and say that's crazy. And we certainly got our fair share of bad press when I was at Babylon, of people saying that's not the way to do things. And video consultations are hoo-ha nonsense. Fast forward to 2020 COVID. I mean, that was the only way anything got done. And so kind of proved that thesis out in the end. So don't be afraid of trying stuff where even if you can't see if anyone else has tried it before. Some of the most rewarding things you can do, you'll be the first. It'll be imperfect, but like I said earlier, I guess in the land of the blind, the one-eyed person can be king or queen. So get yourself in that position.
Love it.
We got some great nuggets today. Great nuggets. I feel like we need to transcribe this one for sure. So, well,
Awesome.
Ash, thank you for making the time, and
Real pleasure, folks.
we'll talk soon. And for those
Absolutely. Take care, guys.
watching, subscribe and pass it on.